Hello guys, I pretty much found out why my cable management couldn't be as good as I wanted it to be. As you can see now, my cable management is way more improved as you've seen in the previous video when I was showcasing my internals when I was first booting it up. And the reason was because the power supply was just simply oriented wrong. It was pretty much upside down. So now it's oriented in the correct placement and the wires are closer to the cable management slot on the Cooler Master case. So what pretty much was going wrong here, besides the whole cable management thing not being that well, is because the power supply also had its intake fan up here, meaning that it was pulling the air from my case inside of here and blowing it onto the components inside the power supply, and then the air wouldn't come out from the back. Some people might prefer this setup, but in general, you don't really want the power supply to intake the warm air from inside of your case and then blow it onto its own components, thus increasing the temperature of the power supply itself, because you don't want the power supply to get hot. Hot power supplies usually don't deliver that much of an efficiency in terms of the power delivery, as well as the amount of power that it can deliver decreases from the rated power that it said it can deliver. As you can see, the power supply I have right here is a very good 450 watt. This is the Antec VP 450. For my setup, I don't need a more powerful power supply. Maybe when I want to do Crossfire later in this year, I'm going to get a 650 watt power supply, but for now, for my Radeon HD 7850, that's a very power efficient graphics card, along with this Ivy Bridge CPU that I bought. These are very power efficient components, so this power supply would have enough power to power those components. Now, the way the power supply is set up right now is the appropriate way, where the intake fan is down here, and as you can see in the bottom of the case, oh, the lighting is horrible. Let me lift this up. The case has a ventilation placement down here with a dust filter, so the power supply can suck in the cool air from the bottom of the case, blow it into the components, cool down the components in the power supply, and then it exits out the back with the honeycomb type ventilation holes that the power supplies usually have. So now this is just, like I said before, my cable management has greatly improved now. Sorry about the audio there. Alright, so pretty much the cables are a lot more neater, and this is something that people do mostly for, you know, aesthetic reasons, where they want the cables to look nice and neat, but there's actually a functionality reason to this, and this just helps the airflow in your case. So naturally, when you have your computer on, the cool air is going to come through from the front, and then the heat rises, so it's going to come through from the front. The cool air is going to become warm while it's cooling your components, so that the warm air is going to start to rise, and then the top fans that I have installed right here, they're going to pull the warm air out. I'm going to also get another fan right here, possibly an LED fan, just for aesthetic reasons, so it can be a full-blown top exhaust heat system, which is what you want. Also, my case has the ability, as you can see over here, to install a side fan, so it can blow cool air directly on the graphics card, or some people actually have it set up where it exhausts the warm air, but you don't really want that because it's going to rob the CPU from the cool air that you get from the front of the case. So if you had a fan right here in the side panel exhausting air, the cool air is going to come in from here and then immediately just be exhausted, and only the graphics cards are going to get the cool air while the CPU gets robbed. So what you want is just a completely natural airflow, where you just have intake fans here bringing in cool air, then you have a fan right here bringing in cool air, so it's just like a rush of cool air, and then cools the components, and then the exhaust fans pull the warm air out, so it's like a nice flush cooling system. Also, I'm not sure this is really much of a significance, but I moved the DVD drive down one slot because since the wires are not they're not dangling over the motherboard for an easy access, they're behind a motherboard tray, so that takes up some of the wires length. So the wire, if I had the DVD drive up here, it just really I didn't feel safe having it like that, because it felt like the wires were really being strained. Like one of the, I think it was the orange wire for the data, not the data, the actual power SATA cable. The orange wire was literally near a 90-degree angle turn coming out of the port, and that's just not what you want. You don't want the cables to be strained at that angle, because eventually it can pull the cable out of the connector, and then usually that whole SATA cable is just useless. Also, I got the 8-pin CPU, just a macro focus, 8-pin CPU to run behind the motherboard tray and right appropriately where I want it to go. It's as if this power supply, there's enough slack here. It's not really putting too much strain. It's like it's enough slack for it to be, you know, not damaging the cable over the long run. So like I said, it's like this power supply was completely made for this case in terms of this one cable. It's like it just fits. It runs behind the motherboard tray and fits perfectly right into this CPU pin socket right here. The 24-pin socket also fits nicely. It goes underneath the thing, as opposed to the way it was before, where it was just dangling over the motherboard. So this has just pretty much been an update video of how I managed to get a much more improved cable management, just because I found out that the power supply was just oriented wrong. So if you're building your computer, just make sure that the intake fans and your power supply are facing the bottom of the case. Also, another indication, as you can see, if it's properly oriented, is simply put this back to macro focus. Usually the ground pin is beneath the positive and negative pin on the AC power connector. Also, I'm not sure if you guys can read that 115. It should be able to be read right side up. That's how you can tell if the power supply is just simply oriented correctly. Once again, it's not the end of the world if your power supply is not oriented correctly. It's just that it's not optimal and it's not the ideal setup for thermal issues, being that the power supply will now pull heat from your inside of your case and pull it and bring the heat inside the power supply and increase the temperature inside there as well. And also, it'll prevent optimal cable management, because the wires will usually be just coming from over here as opposed to being right next to the exit hole to better route the cable. So pretty much that's been it. Yeah, I just moved the hard drive up here because I just wanted it to kind of, I don't want to see the wires there, and it's just better to have the wires a lot more behind there, just to increase the airflow that's coming in from the front of the case. So I moved the hard drive up here so there's be a lot more surface area. So thanks for watching this video, guys. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them. As of now, I am very satisfied with this build. The CPU in here is amazing. It's super fast. I've overclocked it to 3.7 gigahertz on all 4 cores, but the way I have it right now, that's just way if I can lock the CPU clock. But the way I have it right now is just to have Turbo Boost enabled, and for the first 2 cores on this chip, they can both run up to 3.9 gigahertz. The third core can run up to 3.8 gigahertz, and then the fourth core can run up to 3.7 gigahertz. So if an application is only using 2 cores, they'll run at 3.9 gigahertz for both of those cores. If an application is using 3 cores, all 3 cores are going to run at 3.8 gigahertz. And if an application is using all 4 cores, it's going to only run at 3.7 gigahertz. So the cores, if working side by side, they only work at the speed of the slowest core. So that's just to get that out of the way. Once again, thanks for watching this video, guys. Later.